This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM, and we have with us at WZRD Alderman Andre Vasquez of the 40th Ward. How are you today, Andre?
Doing well. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. First of all, could you tell us a little bit more about the Sanctuary City Choice Ballot
Uh,
initiative?
sure. Well, I mean, that was a while ago. So you mean when it was when we had the
Oh,
vote?
so it's not viable anymore then.
Correct. Yeah, it
Oh,
was
okay.
voted. I think in the last city council meeting, a number of us. So our colleague Alderman Ray Lopez had put forth some changes to the welcoming city ordinance that would have weakened it. And in the last city council meeting, 39 members of the city council, including myself, voted to table the discussion so we wouldn't have to continue it. So that's where it ended so far.
Even if it went through with all this pressure from President Trump and the immigrants, how would it have affected it if it hadn't been tabled and if we had
Sure.
stronger protections for our immigrant community?
Yeah, what it would have done, well, actually, if it would have passed, it would have weakened it. It would have given CPD the ability to work with ICE in a
Oh,
way that would have made it worse. So
mm,
that would have changed if our colleague Raymond Lopez would have been successful.
okay. So now it's tabled. It's like buried in committee, in other words.
Yeah, yeah. We the council has basically said we don't think it's worth discussing this matter any further. We've already decided.
Okay. And you are the chair of the Immigrant and Refugee Rights Committee.
Yes. Yep.
So what is happening? What are bills and ordinances that what is your work now in light of what's happening on the federal level?
Yeah, our work has been a lot more about supporting all the different folks on the ground that are protecting our undocumented population. So
Mm.
whether it's doing know your rights workshops all across town, partnering with different organizations that are doing rapid response teams in case people see ICE, but also working on like improving language access for the city and trying to identify ways that we could amend the street vendor ordinances. So we have a lot of people that are selling food on the street, but different cultures prepare food differently. And so we want to make sure that the municipal code is equitable and allows for different people who prepare their food differently to be able to sell on the street legally.
Do they have to they do have to get licenses, right? Through the health department and everything has to be they in order for them to sell. However,
Correct.
they still could get harassed by ICE, right? When
Yes. Yeah.
mm,
The street vendor one is more to make sure that people can find means to actually live, sustain themselves, find places to live. Because out of the 43,000 people that came from Venezuela, only about 10% of them uh, can get work authorization. And so making sure that all the folks that are out here can find different ways to survive and sustain themselves is important.
how could they if that is a question that I've never really understood fully. Since so few of them have the work permit, so now we know it's about 10%. How can the 90% sustain themselves just by entitlements, or is there some other way?
Well, they don't even get entitlements, right? So right now, no, there's no funding going out to anybody. So the
Right.
way they sustain themselves is the way immigrants have sustained themselves every generation, every decade. They find ways to work, whether it's construction or working in like restaurants or hotels or different industries, and trying to find their best way possible to make money happen. Or they're panhandling on the street, as we've seen, or trying to find other means. So for those who are looking to just sell food that they're able to make, we want to make sure we can help simplify their ability to do so.
Also, when they when they do make the money, they do want to, before they could pay the taxes, even though they're undocumented. Now, in face of this, how are they going to be able to pay taxes? They, uh, ICE would be able to find them if they were to pay taxes, right?
I think the reality is, again, like in other decades, people find typically somebody else's identity to work under, right? Like that's what's happened every generation because due to the failure of the federal government not really bringing people on board and allowing them to work so they can become tax base payers, so they can increase the tax base, they can improve the economy. Because the federal government fails to do that, people are still going to find their ways to survive one way or the other.
Well, like in the during the Biden years, they could just pay taxes. They didn't have to worry about getting tracked down, right? Because I think
No, I
when
mean, Biden was deporting people, Obama was deporting people, so this isn't just a Republican problem. There have been
oh,
presidents who similarly have had ICE and deportation in ways that aren't helpful when you think about how we created the fabric of this nation.
mhm. Mm. But they still were, I think that they still were paying taxes, even if they were using like a TIN number, right? And they could still, would the TIN number legalize them in to a certain extent, or even them even if with the TIN number, they still are considered undocumented.
They would still be considered undocumented, and there were, ways that certain folks, depending if they had asylum status or what their undocumented status was, would still be able to work, right? That a visa or anything else. But again, it's been the same across the board, whether it's Trump, Biden, Obama. I think what we've seen is there's this anti-immigrant sentiment that happens in government that does not facilitate the ability for people to become part of our country unless they're coming from certain countries that are viewed as acceptable and typically more European.
Well, you are an immigrant too. Could you tell us a little bit about your family's story?
Yeah, so I was born and raised here, so I'm not an immigrant, but my family was. So my parents
Uh-huh.
came from Guatemala in the late 70s.
Hmm.
And my father was a shoemaker, my mother worked at an envelope factory. So I just remember growing up and helping them, study to get their citizenship. And I remember what it was like hearing people say racist things to my parents and us because they didn't speak the language well enough. And so all those things seem to be constant. Whenever somebody else is coming from a different country, if it isn't a country that's viewed as European, or actually even the European countries, right? When the Italians came, when the Irish came, when the Polish came, they were all treated the same. When the Japanese came, when Mexican, Guatemalan, Venezuelan now, they're always treated as the outsiders. And then one generation later, they become part of this country. And unfortunately, they seem to forget that and treat the next wave of people that come as outsiders as well.
Seems as if there's always someone finding a scapegoat and then using people as a scapegoat instead of working with people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems to be in the best interest of those in power to keep everybody else fighting. So if we're all divided and fighting amongst ourselves while all being, working class folks, then the rich corporate billionaires, the oligarchs can continue to do what they do. And I think we're seeing that now with Trump and Elon Musk and all their ilk as they're, controlling government while we're all fighting amongst ourselves.
Did you see this as clearly in the beginning when you started rapping? You were a very famous rap artist before you became Alderman. So what have you learned in these several years in political life?
Sure. Yeah. And so I think I felt that way even growing up. I think if you listen to like a lot of 90s hip hop music, it was very clear about the racial dynamics and economic dynamics. Like if you listen to a Public Enemy, a KRS-One, Nas, there's a lot of different rap artists, Ice Cube, that would talk about that kind of inequity. And so I think I innately felt it and it resonated with me because that's what it was like for me growing up. And it wasn't until hearing like a Bernie Sanders speak about the same things that I understood that allowed me to feel validated in those feelings, and it helped me kind of develop more of my formal political thought. And so where I am now is pretty similar to where I was growing up. I've just found better ways to articulate it and try to find ways to come to some agreements and improvements that move us forward.
Well, you don't have time for rapping now, but then sometimes do you feel that the rap would be a little outlet for you to vent some of some frustration that you might encounter in politics?
So, so last term, I rapped about two different times at some events. But I think to your point, um, although I get the inkling here and there, I think neighbors would look at me and wonder if I'm working on an album or working at the office. And so I've definitely focused a lot of my time really working in my government role, but also creating opportunities for other artists to be able to have a platform and a voice. And I think we see a lot of artists like even Kendrick Lamar last night at the Super Bowl, really finding ways to speak politically to different audiences in a way that I think is incredibly powerful.
You were you were very strong in the progressive caucus before, but then you moved away a little bit from it. Didn't totally support everything. What made you step away a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I stepped away. I'm actually one of the co-chairs of the Progressive Caucus. So I haven't really stepped away from any of my principles or beliefs. I think at one time, I think about 2020, there was a vote on a budget that Mayor Lightfoot presented that a lot of colleagues and really some movement folks, mostly the Chicago Teachers Union, United Working Families, were pushing alders to vote against the budget. And so I think what we've seen is that some groups had just sought to weaponize anything and make Lightfoot look like she was a failure in her administration so that they could then run someone against her. I think that was part of the dynamics of what was going on. But the budget itself was one where myself, Maria Haddon, Mike Rodriguez, and a number of others who are progressives voted on the budget in order to have a compromise that wasn't going to be worse because there was potential to lay off about 1,000 city workers during COVID. So a number of us voted to do the responsible thing. And I think because of that, there were people who were only seeking to make the Mayor Lightfoot a political enemy who then wanted to try to call some of us less progressive for doing so. But in reality, what we see now, just this past budget with Mayor Johnson, who's viewed as a quote unquote progressive, there was a budget that didn't provide for a lot of things. Budgets are very difficult when you have to figure out deficit and solve problems. So I think my hope is that movement becomes more and more understanding and develops its political sense to get why certain things need to be voted on. So I haven't moved from where I am. If anything, I've found ways to bring people with us and have real nuanced conversations so people understand why our solutions may work.
When you see that Mayor Johnson's budget did not cover the deficit adequately, do you have any solutions or suggestions? And did you speak with Mayor Johnson about the possibilities for covering
Yes,
meeting covering that
we've raised
deficit?
up. Yeah, we have raised up a number of things. For example, a majority of the council understood that we need to do a better job of finding efficiencies. That when you're spending a lot in government, you've got to look at departments to make sure they're efficient and effective. And so I think we need independent audits of our budgets and departments, starting with the largest department, which is the Chicago Police Department. It's got a $2 to $3 billion budget, and yet it's not as effective as it could be. And we never do the job of really, with a fine-tooth comb, identifying if we're appropriating the money to the best of its ability, if we're using the resource to the best of its ability. And if we don't do that, we're just throwing money at a problem. We're not making it safer, and we're increasing the deficits that we have. Part of what I negotiated over this last budget, even though I didn't vote for it, was to change the budget process. So instead of us talking about the budget for only 2 months out of the year, we're going to talk about it all year long and have mid-year reporting in July and then mid-year hearings in September to be able to be better prepared for next time. I also think that it was fair that we might have needed to raise revenue, right? Property taxes to cover some of the deficit. But if you don't make the case to the neighbors that you've done everything to try to save dollars, it becomes that much harder to ask for more.
You heard about that push to shift the property tax burden away from the property owners and businesses and back to the state. What is your view on that? Is it feasible?
Well, I think that Governor Pritzker had tried to pass a fair tax, which would have set a graduated property tax, meaning if you make less, or if your property's worth less, then you're paying less. If it's worth over $1 million, you're paying more. And I think that is a progressive way to look at it because it doesn't impact people inequitably, right? If you're a billionaire and you own property, you should pay more taxes than your average person that's got a single family home, right? Or a two flat. So unfortunately, that did fail at the ballot. But I do believe that if we really talk to neighbors about the importance of doing something like that over time, we might gain the confidence to be able to pass something like it. I think Bring Chicago Home, which is a real estate transaction tax that was trying to move with the city, failed. And I think it's because, in general, people want to know what you're doing with their money, and they want to be able to trust that you're doing something responsible that provides benefit. And I think we can make that case, but I think that Mayor Johnson did not make that case adequately for people to feel confident.
There is a lot of there are a lot of questions about how Mayor Johnson spent a lot of the money. For instance, in addressing the needs of the immigrants and all that. And you did mention independent audits. So is that even possible? I know you're pushing for it. How likely is that to pass? That we could go ahead and do
Sure.
that?
So I think what you've got to do is really continue to make the case. It's definitely possible, but it's about getting everybody to support it and looking at other cities that have done it and seeing what the benefit is in doing it. So I think a lot of the times our colleagues are focused on providing ward services and a lot of different pieces of legislation, that getting them to understand the value of doing this and really supporting it is something that takes a little bit of time, right? When you have something that's as large as our city, it's got 40 different departments and agencies. Each of them is like its own corporation and organization. To then try to get all of that to work and independently audit, it's a big endeavor. So you have to show people how it can be done.
Because we're always talking about the transparency and accountability is better, but without those audits, that can't be done. So
Yeah, I mean,
when you
I agree. I think we have a serious problem related to the amount of debt that we have to pay back because of the pension debt and because of past administrations not paying into the pensions. That the more transparent we are and the more we can show that to neighbors, the more they'll understand the hole that we actually have to dig ourselves out of and why we're asking for raised revenue to cover that, because it can only get worse if we don't.
I it seems as if nobody really understands the magnitude of the deficits. Are we able to are you able to get the independent audits for all 40 departments?
So I think we've got to figure out like the cost, who would do them, right? Which is why I think starting at the largest departments and working our way down is probably the best way to do it. Because as you keep continuing to work your way down, it becomes easier as the departments get smaller. But starting with the biggest one might yield the largest return and show people how effective they can be.
So what is the pushback against an independent audit for the Chicago Police Department?
I think a lot of what happens was two things. One is people become very nervous about saying anything related to the police department. So if you're talking about an audit, people go, oh, you might be trying to defund the police. When in reality, you got to look and see if we're effective. But having that conversation is challenging when people reflexively feel like we should be spending more money and putting more officers on the street, as opposed to understanding how we're spending the money we currently have invested. So I think that becomes challenging. For the city council members, having to answer constituents about that is one thing. The second thing is often the answer will be, well, the budget office does audits. And it's like, well, that's not independent, right? We want somebody outside looking in to be able to point out things that we can improve.
And do you have any idea about how to find an independent auditor? Do you still have to have an ordinance passed and then go about it that way?
Yeah, I think we've got to look and see what other cities have similar models or have done it. Something that some people brought up is having a city charter, which would sort of mandate certain things, and that would be a state level change. So I think it's worth exploring to see what structures we can put in place that can help the city council better responsibly manage not only the dollars, but the resources that we're given the privilege to govern over.
What about the negotiations between the CTU and the CPS and Pedro Martinez? What is your view about that? And who,
Yeah.
what do you see for the future?
Well, I think that similarly, CPS has a lot of pension debt and budget challenges that they've relied on the city to be able to cover in a lot of instances. I think now that a Board of Education is about to become fully elected, that they should be the body that has to identify how they cover their own bills. And I think we've got to move ourselves to that place. We also have to empower them to be able to raise more taxes if they need to on their own, as opposed to just having us fill in the gap. And so there's a good opportunity to get there. I think the CPS CEO has done a solid job of making sure that we're not digging ourselves into deeper debt, but isn't the transformational kind of figure I think that's necessary in our public school systems. So it becomes very challenging to try to square that. I think what I've also seen is that the teachers union, there seems to be a difference between the membership, right? All the teachers that are our neighbors that do work, that need to be supported, get the benefits they need. There's a difference between the membership and the leadership that I think in some regards have kind of been taking advantage of the moment and the fact to have a mayor who was a former member in ways that I understand could lead them to short-term wins, but these could effectively bankrupt the system in the long run. And I think we've got to look and identify how we're paying for the things and what it means to take on future debt, for example, when you've got something that's already underwater the way it is.
And that's why Pedro Martinez was against further debt.
Yeah, I mean, I was against it as well. Taking out a $300 million short-term, high-interest loan to pay off a debt is incredibly irresponsible.
What's the budget for CPS versus the CPD? You said that CPD is the largest of all. Then is the CPS the second, and about how much versus how much?
So CPS is a whole multi-billion-dollar budget of its own. It's actually not a city department at all. It's a complete different government than the city is. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused. We pay some of it because, right, we have an interest in the city doing well, but city government and departments are completely separate from agencies like CPS or the park district, for example, right? Those are completely their own separate bodies, but because we're tied to them financially, people don't understand the difference and sometimes get equally frustrated when they see increases in taxes everywhere.
The sister agency. So those are totally independent entities. But then where do they get their funding? Do they get their funding from the city too, or
So
from
CPS, for example, can raise the property tax up on its own, either 5% or the consumer price index or inflation increase, whichever one is lower. So they're capped at how much they can raise property taxes, but they do raise their own property taxes. Now, when it comes to the pension debt, Chicago has historically paid for that debt, but in reality, they should be paying for their own, which is why when they move to fully elected board, I believe they should do that and remove the cap so they can raise their own taxes further to cover their bills, separate from what we're doing.
But would they be able to if they were to do it on their own, are they able to raise that much? What they don't have a cap, but then who oversees them? Who actually
Sure.
make sure
The
that they don't raise too much?
the Board of Education. So the Board of Education, which was going to be fully elected, they would be ones that would vote on their own budget the way city council votes on a city budget, right? So now that they're going to have fully elected members, they should be the ones responsible for doing all of that, is what I believe.
Got it. So before, the board was under the mayor's purview because he appointed them all.
Correct.
But right now, that shifted away. Has it shifted enough? How much further influence does the mayor have on the elected school board?
Yeah. So right now, 10 of the 21 positions were elected.
Mhm.
The other 11 were appointed by the mayor, right? So currently it's half and half. But in 2026, they're all going up for election. And then it'll become a fully elected board. And at that point, I think it's fair for them to be able to control their destiny as opposed to being tied to a mayor because the mayor would have appointed them.
And also, those that have been elected now, are any of those actually being supported by the mayor?
Yeah, there are some that won. I think 3 out of the 10 were folks that the CTU and the mayor had supported. So in total, that would have been 14 out of 21.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And that might affect the vote. Of course, they have their independence in voting, but still, perhaps when they want to get reelected, they still depend on the CTU for support.
Yeah, but I think ultimately the voters are the ones that vote. So depending on what they do in those positions, voters could support or not, you know.
There is a member of the school board right now that's also a rap artist. Could you tell us a little bit about him and then also uh, the connection between the two of you?
Yeah, Rhymefest or Chase Smith is one of the board members who got elected. And so he actually, I've known him since when I was rapping pretty young, like around 15, 17 years of age. So almost 30 years ago at this point, we all kind of known each other. He actually ran for alderman in the 20th ward a number of years ago. And so he actually ran first. I was the first to get elected. And now he's elected to the Board of Education. So him and I, we know each other really well, and we're going to find opportunities to partner up.
Do you know much about his platform and his goals? And have you ever discussed those with him?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like me, where we're both progressive but also independent. We're not tied to anybody in particular. And so I think when you grow up in the city and you deal with the struggles of being poor, you more understand what people are going through now. And so it's really good to have somebody like Che in our Board of Education. And what we want to do is really find ways to talk to people across town and listen to them to make sure that government is responsive to the needs of those who need it the most.
Well, you have been at with the mayor on some things, but you do work with him against what Tom Homan and President Trump are doing. So could you discuss a little bit about that? How you stand with the mayor?
Yeah, I mean, I think people might have seen this last term under Mayor Lightfoot, but if I think there are things that I disagree with about the way we run government, I'm gonna be vocal about it. I usually have those conversations with the mayor or their team first. And then if we disagree, like I'm gonna say that publicly because my bosses are the people who elected us, the public. And so I think under Johnson, people have a better idea of how independent I am. That if Johnson is doing things that I don't think in the best interest are in the best interest of the city, for example, advocating for a Bear Stadium when we have to figure out how to pay for so many other things, I'm going to say that. I think the people who elected me reelected me because they know I am going to think through these things and I am going to be transparent and I do make sure that I'm accountable to the neighbors. And so There are times where that's put us at odds with the mayor, right? He wanted to put migrants in tents on 38th and Cali with a group like Garda World, which is almost like a paramilitary security group. We were against that. He was evicting people out of the shelters after 60 days. We were against that. But more recently, when you've got Tom Holman and President Trump coming, whether you agree or disagree on things in the past, you realize you have to find ways to partner and work together to make sure we're taking care of our communities. And so, as it relates now to having Tom Holman there, a lot of the Know Your Rights information and a lot of the work that we do in the committee really it syncs up to what they're doing and creates opportunities for us to partner.
Do you have any say or do you know about the detention centers and they removed nonprofits that are helping the immigrants and even the posters that inform them about what to do. Do you is there anything that that you or other members of city council can do to help those people?
Well, the detention centers, to my understanding, there aren't any in the city, right? So those are the ones that ICE has established kind of outside of the city, even in different states. And so we don't have a lot of say what can happen there. As far as the shelters in the city, they're no longer just migrant shelters. So they're shelters for anyone who needs it. And we do ensure that Know Your Rights information is available in like all buildings in the city of Chicago so people can avail themselves of the information.
They did, I think Tom Holman did mention that our city's people are very educated about knowing their rights. Do you know if ICE has ever gone to a shelter to try to find
Yeah,
people?
to my understanding, they have not. I did see where Tom Homan seemed to be pretty frustrated that Chicago is educated. I think it says a lot about the leadership or lack of leadership in the Trump administration if their goal or what they're more satisfied with is people being uneducated. I think the more we learn, the more we're empowered, and we should be because we are the public and the electorate. And so to have to not be educated in a way that appeases them and gives them opportunity to take advantage is not something anybody should strive for. We should look to be as educated as possible. So I'm pretty proud of Tom Holman saying that about our city.
When and a lot of the school, Hamline School,
Yeah.
then there were other instances too, in the Native American community. That's in Arizona. It's separate from us, but there are different entities that are going into these communities, and then people are assuming that they are ICE, but oftentimes it turns out that they are not ICE. Do you know if those separate governmental entities in the past would go to like schools or other places to do investigations? Is it the possible that it is actually ICE gauging the response of these spaces to see how they would respond before ICE actually goes to those spaces?
There is potential for that. I think what we know is that whether it was a Secret Service or ICE, it was the federal agents under the Department of Homeland Security that were showing up to Hamline School here in the city. And what we also don't know is if those federal agents are going to scout, for example, and then communicate to ICE. I think either way, the fact that we have federal agents show up because an 11-year-old kid made a video that was anti-Trump is scary because government shouldn't be able to impose itself that much, especially in a country where we pride ourselves on our freedom of speech.
And then in the past, because we never heard of something like federal agents going to a school or going to spaces to do these checks or investigations. Uh, but now it seems it's popping up all over the place. Was it that before it was happening? Because you would probably know better than we would. Was it happening as often as before, or we didn't know about it, or is it really happening more now?
I think it probably was happening around the same, but because we were under Biden or Obama, you didn't see people making that much of a fuss. But under Trump, you do see it. I think there are concerns about how much further Trump would take it, and I think that's something we all need to be mindful of.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So what are the city's next steps, do you know, in regards to the migrant population? In are, how are the shelters holding up since they're together with the homeless population? You do know how there are so many homeless people living on the trains, and I'm not sure if some of them are migrants or our own homeless population. Do you know the state of that of the homeless population and the homeless migrant population?
Yeah, I do, and I think we have somebody here. Sorry.
Sorry,
Hi.
the older person will have to jump off in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I
Let
could
this be
answer
the
this.
last
I'd say,
question.
Okay.
yeah, thank you. I'd say like what we're seeing is although the shelter system has grown from what it was before the migrants showed up, it wasn't enough then. It still isn't enough now. And
Right.
so we do have to find ways to continue to grow it out. But it's very concerning because if we got so much money from the federal government to operate the Department of Public Health, the Department of Family Support Services, if Trump were to cut off that funding, I don't even know how we'd maintain what we currently have.
Well, good luck, Andre Vasquez, in your work. Thank you for all your work, and
Yeah,
thank you for the interview. Thank you for all the
absolutely.
information.
Thank you so much. This was great. You take care.
Yes, thank
Bye.
you.